to be talking about the Tuvalu country project I mentioned in my opening presentation. And joining us for that is Simit Naik, who's the Director of Business Services from nChain, coming out of London. Hey, Simit.
Hey, Jimmy. Hey, New York.
Hi. Hey, New York. He'll be here for CoinGeek New York, though, right?
I will be, yeah. Looking forward to it.
All right, so both of these companies are working on this project that we're going to discuss, and we're going to start with George in a moment. But as I mentioned earlier, if you weren't here earlier, the small island nation of Tuvalu in the South Pacific is creating the world's first national digital ledger to move their e-government services, government records, citizens records and services to a ledger built on the BSV blockchain. So we're going to start with George because you are responsible for this project happening in the first place because of a blog post you wrote on New Year's Eve, New Year's Day, 2019-2020, the crossover day, entitled A 5-Point Plan to Future-Proof Tuvalu, the Sinking Nation. A sinking nation. Tell us about this blog post and how did it trigger this blockchain project for a country?
Yeah. So yeah, this blog post was sort of written overnight, believe it or not, from a spark of inspiration with a relative of mine. And this was at the end of 2019. And it came because my relative was telling me about how Tuvalu was about to, or is looking to renegotiate their .tv license. So some of you might not know this, but Tuvalu is actually the owner of the .tv domain, and they license this out to other larger companies. And so first up, actually, could I get a show of hands? And Jimmy, you can tell me how many people know. How many people know where Tuvalu is?
Who knows where Tuvalu is? Okay, I'd say about a third of the people, but some of them are cheating because they're BSV company people who've heard you talk.
All right, for the BSVers, yeah, you can ignore. I know you know where it is now. But yeah, so for those of you who don't know where Tuvalu is, it's located in the South Pacific. I think it's the 4th smallest nation in the world with a population of around 12,000. And so the article that I had created pulled together my knowledge of what was happening in the overall blockchain space and Bitcoin, and tied it into how Tuvalu could actually leverage the sort of renegotiation period for .tv with something like BSV for its long-term digital transformation efforts. And so that if you just look up 5-Point Plan for Tuvalu on Google, you can get that article. But that's how it came about. I shared it on my networks, and because it's a very small community in the Tuvaluan space, it managed to make its way straight to government, and specifically Simon Kofe, who is the minister that we are speaking with and working with.
And what's your link to Tuvalu, George?
Yes, of course. So my mother is Tuvaluan Samoan, and that's how I am linked in to all this. So family is an important part of culture, and the culture influences business and politics in the South Pacific. So that was my way in.
Okay, and so this got to the attention of one of the ministers in the government of Tuvalu, and then how did it lead to this project with nChain?
Yes, so when looking at, after speaking with the Honorable Minister, the opportunity came about to actually realize this plan that I put in the article. And so I was looking at a few of the providers in the BSV space, who would be best suited to partnering up and realizing this vision. And nChain, came out on the top of that list. And so that's how we ended up connecting.
And so before we get to Simit, tell us why the nation may be sinking and why this is important to the motivation behind this project.
For sure. Now, of course, there's a lot of politics around climate change, but Tuvalu was one of the first countries to experience this firsthand in terms of rising ocean levels. And so often the Western media portrays Tuvalu as the sinking nation. However, for this project, the Honorable Minister does want to help shift that narrative away from being a sinking nation, one that's helpless, because they believe that they, can do more than just be seen as a sinking nation.
And because sea levels are, of course, affecting the island a lot.
Correct. Okay. That is a reality.
Yeah. So Simit, let's turn to what role nChain is playing. Tell us what nChain is doing in terms of working with George and his other company on building this national digital ledger, and give us some examples of what this digital ledger will do for the country.
Sure. So nChain is taking the lead on the technical side. So in terms of design and deployment of what we call the Tuvaluan National Digital Ledger, which is the overarching kind of vision for what we're looking to do in Tuvalu. the blog post that George wrote had a couple of really interesting points. One of which was to move to more of a paperless society, trying to retain kind of the culture, the traditions of the Tuvaluans. And the second was to kind of use a digital form of cash. So the Tuvalu National Digital Ledger project is, or can be, categorized as two kind of distinct parts of the delivery or the project itself, which is one, focusing on introducing a digital form of money onto the island. And that digital form of money helps to improve financial inclusion of Tuvaluans across the 9 islands, but it also helps the government to better manage cash flow across the different islands, but also to help them reduce the cost and effort of actually having to ship physical notes and coins over from Fiji or Australia every quarter. So the digital money side of things, has a number of different benefits, one of which is the financial inclusion side, but the other is to kind of bridge the gap from moving from a very paper-based society to more of a digital and e-commerce kind of society. And so that was one part.
I'll hold you a moment for that, because Tuvalu uses, I understand, the Australian dollar, right? They don't have their own fiat currency, and so they have to actually ship Australian dollars in note form from where, Fiji or Australia, is that right?
Yeah, so they have the correspondent banks in Fiji, and every quarter they have to ship around $1 million Australian dollars worth of currency across to Tuvalu. Once it gets to the main island, they then have to ship that across the other islands across Tuvalu. And so it's a huge undertaking for the national bank. And you're right, Tuvalu doesn't have its own central bank, and therefore doesn't technically have its own national currency, although they do have the concept of the Tuvaluan dollar, which sits alongside the Australian dollar, but it's pegged 1-to-1 to the Australian dollar. And so you may notice that rather than calling it CBDC, I've called it digital money, is because we are introducing digital money rather than digital cash. But one of our kind of longer term visions for Tuvalu is to give them more sovereignty, and therefore in the future introduce the concept of central bank digital currency, for them to be in a better position to be able to kind of manage their own economy and the stability of that economy. And so that's one kind of key area of the Tuvalu National Digital Ledger project. The other side is more around...
Before you get to that quickly, I just have a quick question for George. So as I understand it from your last presentation on this, there's one single ATM in the country of Tuvalu, is that correct?
Yep.
So does everyone just rush to that ATM when the boatload of money comes?
I suppose so. It's a very interesting thing. A lot of, even on payday, a lot of them still have to go to the bank as well to get their cash. So, something that pushes them towards a more digital solution may very well help ease the pain of that.
Got it. And there's just a person with a credit card on the island, right, who has to...
Yes. They find ways around it. They hack their way around it, because many of them have, kind of visited or traveled to Fiji, New Zealand, Australia. So they know what's available in the world. It's just about getting that into Tuvalu.
Yeah. All right, Simit, let's talk about this. Tell us about the second part of the project.
Sure. And so the second part of the project is to introduce the concept of digital registries. And again, going back to George's 5-point plan, one of the key points in that plan was to create a more paperless society, trying to digitize some of the paper-based information and data they hold, to digitize some of the processes, for example, the citizenship application process, but then also look at what we can then kind of digitize next. So one of the first steps to that side of the project is to stop capturing information that we are going to be generating as part of citizen application process. So when people want to apply for citizenship, we're going to start capturing that data, store that in a registry, and that'll be the foundational capability to create a concept of a national digital identity. And so that's our first step. Using that data we're going to capture from application processes to create identity of new citizens, and over time start migrating some of the identity information from various sources across the island to then create identities for the existing Tuvaluan citizens. And so that's the first kind of step in that kind of registry service part of the project. Going forward, we're going to start looking at, capturing and digitizing healthcare records. So, we've talked a lot about electronic healthcare records. Electronic healthcare records is one of the, the key use cases for what we're looking to do in terms of the digital registry side of the project. but even education records. And Tuvalu is also, one of the countries that generate a lot of their revenue and GDP from kind of fishing. So they have a lot of fishing permits that they provide to fishermen from Tuvalu and outside. And so we're going to use digital registry services to capture information relating to fishing permits. And then we'll start looking at things like birth and death certificates. And then eventually we'll have this form of national digital identity that will allow them to not only access their information across all of these registry services, but it will also become a way for them to kind of onboard into different payment services. We talked about the first phase of our payment kind of strategy to introduce the concept of digital money. And for those who've kind of been to Africa, it's going to be very similar kind of to digital mobile money, accessing it by your mobile phone, have the account services on your mobile phone provided by potentially the national telecom provider. But then eventually we want to do remittances and e-commerce payments. And so we can then link identity into some of those payment flows. And so identity becomes your gateway to payments and the digital registry services that we're going to be building up.
So a big project, right? This will probably take years really to deploy and implement. George, where are you all in the process? And how soon can we expect to see something deployed live?
Yes, so we're in between phase 1 and 2. So we finished up phase 1 and looking to move into phase 2. But for anyone who's worked with government, you'll know that there's things can go a lot slower than you expect, unless you're El Salvador. With that, it's very interesting because we see what's happening in El Salvador. And this is also one of the reasons why we are happy with Tuvalu doing their due diligence and really taking their time to make this work properly. Because as you can see, when we do this becomes the actual first proper use case of the technology, as opposed to using Bitcoin just for its speculation. And we want Tuvalu to be essentially a leader in showing what a nation can do beyond just the money aspect. And this is exactly what Simit has been talking about from the actual on-chain aspects.
Yeah, and I know as part of this process, you've been doing a lot of community interviews and dialogue. Why is that important in terms of the design and rollout of a technology system?
Right. So in my past life, I worked with large organizations with their digital transformation efforts. And one thing I've seen time and time again, whenever you're rolling out any new technology, is very rarely the technology issues that come up, and has a lot to do with the cultural and adoption aspects. And so by taking time on the cultural aspect, you can ensure a much smoother adoption rate for the new technologies. Because when it comes to change, the technology is fast and quickening, but people's brains still have a hard time with change in general. So it doesn't matter how advanced the technology, you're either going to have that change be fast, quick, and disrupt a whole bunch of things, and it be unpleasant, or you do it a little bit more slower and really look at the behaviors that you need to work with to change over and to make that as smooth as possible. Yeah. Change isn't always easy.
Yeah, and George, how is this ledger, this national digital ledger, actually going to help the country preserve its culture? It's something I know you've talked about.
Yes.
How is that? Tell us about that.
Correct. So there are a lot of organizations in the world who are dealing with, creating digital twins, right? And for Tuvalu especially, because they have the very real issue of potentially, losing their land, the concept of immortalizing Tuvalu on a blockchain is something that actually the Honorable Minister Simon Kofe shared in terms of what the appeal or opportunity is here for something like BSV and a national digital ledger. So by getting a lot of these sort of cultural artifacts, this data on chain, it's just a way of preservation, or sort of that intangible cultural heritage aspect for those who are familiar with the term. And NFTs, I'll actually say NFTs is sort of a good example of how culture is translating into this space.
Yeah, and because there is the very real possibility that if the sea levels continue to rise around the Tuvaluan Islands, they may have to actually take their people and relocate their entire population to a different landmass.
Exactly.
And so part of the purpose of this project is to help preserve the culture of the country, as well as to move to a paperless society. So if they ever have to move the people, you don't even need servers because the data is in the blockchain, right? It exists out there. So it's a really good example of the power of data. And Power of big blocks. Simit, what are some of the challenges that you're facing? Because obviously this sounds fascinating, great. It's a great model for how other countries that are bigger could actually deploy a national digital ledger, but I'm sure this must be really hard. So what are some challenges and what are things that can be done to help?
So I think one of the biggest challenges when you look at Tuvalu as a nation is that they're not as advanced as other countries in terms of payment systems, for example, or the use of technology. So going back to George's point, coming in with, blockchain technology, which is very complicated and complex, is a challenge. And so what we have to do is kind of demystify it, make it easy for them to kind of understand what it is we're looking to do, but more importantly, understand what it is they're looking to achieve. And so very early on, we kind of stop focusing on technology and start to understand exactly what it is they were looking to do and what they were looking to achieve and what challenges and problems they were trying to address. And in that way, what we kind of started to understand is that a lot of this comes down to culture, as George says, but also how do we do this in a way that doesn't add friction? Now, because everything is paper-based, the use of cash is very simple. I just give it to, the storekeeper, to my friend, and that's that done. If we try and introduce technology and we add additional steps into that, not only does it complicate the process, it creates friction. When you create friction, it's very difficult for people to accept change. And so what we have to do is kind of basically oversimplify everything we're doing. And so that's one of the earliest things that we found when we were doing this project, is that we have this tendency to kind of over-engineer, over-complicate, and we have to take a complete step back and look to actually make it as easy as commerce is today, or easy as for people to go and get an application. And so that was one of the big challenges. The second challenge is kind of infrastructure. We would talk about payments and we talk about digital payments, but we need to have the infrastructure across the island to be able to support that. At the moment, there is Wi-Fi across the islands. There's another project that's running concurrently to introduce new forms of communication, satellite-based internet, for example, and underwater cables. And so in the future, we know we're going to get the ability to have more stable infrastructure, both internet and power. But what we also need to do is kind of design what we're building for what they have today. And so we have to have the ability to support offline payments, just like cash has the unique ability to do offline payments. And so that's one of the benefits of using BSV, is that, using technology like SPV gives us the ability to do offline payments for very low value transactions, which is perfect in an economy like Tuvalu. And so again, we have to kind of design for the lowest kind of specification of technology and infrastructure. And that gives you a different challenge, but it's a challenge that we've kind of addressed, and it's a challenge that we've addressed by using BSV, and that's one of the other thing that has helped us kind of shape what we're going to be doing now, but also in the future.
Yeah, and I think Simit's point reinforces a couple of key things I think about BSV. As I mentioned in my opening speech, we view the Bitcoin blockchain as data infrastructure, and that is what they're using it for this national digital ledger, for both the records part as well as the digital money part. In addition, you've been hearing a lot of the companies in our space really talk about usability, making all of this technology as easy to use as possible, because for too long, Bitcoin seemed too complicated for people. People don't like those long string character addresses. They get scared of them. In the BSV world, people have created much easier ways to send Bitcoin BSV by a handle, like your Twitter name. You can send to a wallet just knowing someone's name. Mine is Jimmy Nguyen, the word Nguyen, W-I-N, or to an email address. And it all gets converted on the back end. That ease of use is really key to growing global adoption. So have you been talking with other countries besides Tuvalu to do something similar, or is it too difficult to do until you get one use case, Tuvalu up and launched, or is it too difficult to do concurrently other countries? So tell us about any discussions you've had with other countries or government agencies.
I'll mention first, and then Simit, you can go after. So it is one of those chicken and egg things. I think really getting the Tuvalu project up and running just helps with the ability to prove what we're doing. And that will obviously make it easier to speak to other countries. But I have already had conversations with other nations who have seen the news about what Tuvalu is doing. So, and again, with government, just long conversations because they have other competing priorities. But that hasn't gotten in the way of us being able to speak to them. But it's just about, I think once this starts happening, it will just help accelerate the process.
We are having conversations with other central banks from across the world around the concept of digital cash and digital money. What we're looking to do in Tuvalu is a very kind of unique set of challenges, and everyone's interested in understanding how we're going to address that and how that's going to work in reality. And so we are having these conversations, but I think the success of our deployment in Tuvalu will go a long way for us to be able to then convert some of those discussions into real projects and deliveries of in their own right.
I'll add to that because I spend a lot of my time out doing similar conversations. And I think it's more likely you'll see governments of some countries start implementing projects for particular agencies or use cases within a government, as opposed to an entire country trying to attempt this national digital ledger, especially for bigger countries. The United States, it's just very difficult to get anything done with government agencies here. But some of the other countries I know I and Simit have talked to together or apart, we focus on particular agencies. So for example, I can tell you that in the United Arab Emirates, where I've been spending a lot of time over the last year, we are in serious talks with one of the government ministries about both educating people in their ministry, but also doing an assessment to see how the BSV blockchain might be able to be used to make their internal data processes more efficient. It's a very important ministry, but it's just for one particular ministry. It'd be too difficult to say convince the whole country to move quickly. It's sort of picking particular use cases within a country. Are there particular government departments within Tuvalu? There's not that many government departments. There are some. Which are you talking to about possible use or deployment of NFTs in Tuvalu? Is there any particular government agency?
The NFTs one is still very young and fresh. So, it's been hinted at, but not specifically, pushing the NFT, I guess, use case as hard right now, because we're looking at the basics and the foundations. So the Ministry for Foreign Affairs, Justice and Communications, that's who we started out with. But during phase one, we had touch points with, the Ministry of Finance and a few other ministries so that they were aware of what is going on. But of course, in a project like this, you would see that the Ministry of Finance would be a very important one to bring along those conversations.
Are there smart contract uses that you're thinking about with any of the government agencies?
So yes, definitely. I think we won't be introducing those until phase 3, because phase 2 is all about delivering those foundational capabilities, the digital registries, the digital money. In phase 3, for sure, there will be the introduction of smart contracts to kind of govern decisions, govern, the distribution of money. And so those are things that we're looking to do, but those are the things we've earmarked for kind of phase 3. We believe phase 2 is just too early to kind of introduce that level of complexity, whilst we're still trying to deliver those kind of foundational capabilities to actually digitize data and digitize money. But smart contracts definitely is part of our phase 3 strategy.
All right, George, I'll end with this last question to you. I know culture is very important to you personally from all of our conversations. How does it feel to work on a project where you get to combine your technology passions with your cultural heritage? And what do you want people to know about Tuvalu in the future based upon this work?
For sure. I mean, it's interesting, right? Because the other company startup I'm working with is called Anna. And for this project, for the TNDL project, it really is an honor to be able to work on something that just honors my ancestors. I've always wanted to find a way to sort of honor them for having, made those migrations from Tuvalu to Fiji to New Zealand to Australia, and then eventually allowing me to be who I am today. And I think this is a way of sort of giving back. So it makes me very proud to even have the opportunity. And in terms of what I would love the world to know is that, Tuvalu is more about being a sinking nation. And what we really want people to sort of see Tuvalu as is a rising nation, especially when it comes to, becoming a rising digital nation.
Well, we can't wait for you to host the next BSV Blockchain conference in Tuvalu, and so we can all hopefully get lots of palm trees and beach time there. Right? Let's give them a round of applause. Thank you, Simit and George.